President Trump is on a collision course with the United States judicial system, defying their orders, ordering the Department of Justice not to comply with requests for information, and publicly attacking the judges by calling them corrupt and calling for their impeachment when they rule against him when he takes executive action. Should we be concerned about this growing conflict between the executive branch of government and the judicial branch of government? Join me in a legal deep dive into the conflict between the president and the United States judicial system. Now, one of the cornerstones of this administration is their stance on illegal immigration. And with that, in that scope, this president has issued a flurry of executive orders in order to put deportation of illegal immigrants into overdrive. However, like all laws in this country, the exercise of presidential authority is still subject to judicial review to determine whether or not the authority is being lawfully exercised or if it's constitutional. Recently, the president signed an executive order referencing a federal statute that's called the Alien Enemies Act. This is some legislation that was actually created in 1798. And I want to be clear, I did not misstate it. It's 1798, not 1978. Now, under the terms of the Alien Enemies Act, during times of war or invasion, the president of this country has broad authority to deport, arrest, detain illegal aliens. This power also applies to any non-citizens. Now, using the authority given to him under that act, the president used that act as a basis to deport some individuals he believed are associated with the Venezuelan gang. Now, the deportations that were authorized under the use of that executive action were challenged in federal court. The United States District Judge heard from the Department of Justice and the individuals making the challenge and decided he would issue a temporary restraining order ordering the Trump administration to no longer or suspend making deportations under that order until he could review the decision and the statute and determine whether or not the president acted lawfully. Well, the Trump administration ignored the order and continued the deportations throughout the weekend. Well, as you can imagine, this judge, like any judge would be, was very upset that after he issued a restraining order, the deportations continued and the Department of Justice flagrantly ignored his order. He held the hearing in order to hold the Department of Justice accountable and get their position, and their response was his order was not enforceable. Now I'm going to stop right there and let's talk about this, because this is not how it works. Obviously, any party in any type of action, civil or criminal, if they receive an adverse ruling against them that they don't like, they have the right to appeal. There is an appellate process that all the parties have the right to. But if a party to a legal action receives an adverse ruling and a judge makes an order requiring them to take some act or refrain from some act, if they don't agree with the decision, they can't just say, nope, not gonna do it. It doesn't work that way. I'm gonna give you some examples. We all know Diddy has his sex trafficking criminal trial coming up. Let's imagine that after the trial, Diddy's convicted of sex trafficking and the judge sentences him to 50 years in prison. And Diddy says, no, we're not gonna do that. This trial was racially motivated. My ancestors were brought over here against their will 300 years ago. I don't recognize your authority over me. I'm not going to prison. And walks out of the courtroom, hops on his jet, and goes back to his mansion. Do you think that's how it works? No. Everybody would lose their mind. He would be in jail, he'd be taken into custody, and be given prison time on top of that 50 years. Hey, imagine in a civil case, a drunk driver hits a kid playing in the street, kills the kid, the parents of the kid file a lawsuit against the drunk driver, gets $1 million judgment, and the insurance company just says, no, we're not gonna pay it. The kid should have been playing in the street anyway. It was a kangaroo court. Parents should have been watching the kids. Oh no, we're not gonna file an appeal. We're just not gonna pay it. Again, it doesn't work that way. Now, at the same hearing, the judge wanted to conduct an investigation to determine to what extent his order was violated. he requested the Department of Justice provide him with information regarding when the flights left, who was deported, and the dates and times the decisions were made to have the individuals deported. Now you would think that any lawyers, especially the Department of Justice that operates within our judicial system, would simply comply with the court's order and provide the information. Well, that's not what this Department of Justice did. To the contrary, this Department of Justice has taken the position that this federal judge needs to back off and stop interfering with the president's exercise of his executive authority. And actually, the Department of Justice has still not complied with the order and has not provided the court with the information the court requested. In fact, they've publicly indicated they're looking at what legal means and mechanisms they can use to legally withhold providing that information to the court. What that tells me is the Department of Justice knows they willfully defied the order and continued the deportations anyway. But what they don't want to do is give the judge the evidence establishing that's what they did. Now, it doesn't stop with the Department of Justice defying the federal judge's order. At this point, President Trump has weighed in. President Trump has publicly called this judge crooked and called for his impeachment. Now, honestly, this shouldn't surprise anyone. Whether you like Trump or not, you have to know at this point that's part of his playbook. Whenever there's a ruling that goes against him or judge rules in a manner he doesn't like, he publicly attacks the judge, making personal attacks, professional attacks, calling them corrupt, calling them radical, saying they should be impeached. That's kind of part of his playbook. In fact, if you can look back at every single civil trial and criminal trial that he's lost or been prosecuted for, he has done that consistently and publicly throughout the trial. Now, what's concerning at this point is congressmen and senators around the country that support the president are seeing his words as a call to action. Since Trump has made his comments, we have since had a number of congressmen publicly echoing Trump's calls for this judge to be impeached. And one congressman has actually already filed articles of impeachment. Now, these attacks on our judiciary have become so concerning that the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court has weighed in. Now, although he didn't name Trump specifically or anyone specifically, Chief Justice Roberts made a public statement saying, for 200 years in this country, impeachment has never been the method of disagreement with judicial rulings. There's an appellate process that is in place which should be utilized. Now, although Chief Justice Roberts didn't specifically name or identify Trump or anyone else, you would think that would be the end of it. However, that's not what happened. This president felt the need to publicly respond, specifically naming the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in his response. In making a subtle attack to Chief Justice Roberts, this president made a public comment saying that nationwide restraining orders should be eliminated and specifically named Chief Justice Roberts and said that he and the United States Supreme Court need to stop this toxic practice. Now, much of this is very significant. Number one, you don't ever see the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court weighing in on public issues or political issues. They only have authority to rule on matters that are before them for their review. So the fact that he felt the need to weigh in is significant. And I do believe it's because he sees these constant attacks on federal judges and members of the judiciary when they make adverse rulings to this administration as a looming threat to the judicial department of our country. It is also equally significant, if not more significant, that this president has chosen to publicly call out the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land that has ultimate authority on legal issues. I gotta call it like I see it. These frequent public attacks on the judiciary are setting a dangerous trend for our country. As we all learned in elementary school, there are three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. The whole checks and balances system we all learned about a long time ago. This administration is sending the message to all judges saying basically, if you don't rule in our favor the way we want, when we want, then we're gonna call for your impeachment, we're gonna publicly attack you, and we're gonna try to get you out of office. And if you are on the bench and you wanna stay on the bench, then you're nothing but a rubber stamp in a black robe, and you need to rule in our favor when matters come before you. That is the message they're trying to send. They want to eliminate the judges making decisions based on what they believe is their interpretation of the law and the Constitution, and make decisions based on what this administration would want them to do. And the entire point of the three-tiered checks and balance system in the three branches of government is to make sure that no individual, no president has unlimited, unchecked power, and no individual has control over every branch of government. Because when you have that, you don't have a president, you have a dictator. Think about the ramifications of this administration continue to defy court orders and attack our judicial system. How will our judicial department enforce the rule of law and hold those who violate the law accountable when the individuals that are violating the law and their heads of state, the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, are not loyal to the country but to an individual? I think we should all be concerned about a constitutional crisis with a showdown between the judicial branch and the executive branch of government. So what do you think? Do you think the checks and balances system of our government is important? Or do you think a president should have unlimited authority to make the decisions he wants without judicial oversight? Do me a favor, post your comments, and call it like you see it. That's it. What's good, people? Suits, Law and Order, LA Law, Matlock, Perry Mason. I think it'd be fun to do a podcast talking about our favorite all-time lawyer TV shows. What we like, what we don't like, what's realistic, what's not realistic, and really just go down the rabbit hole. I'll even share which lawyer TV show made the difference in me wanting to be a lawyer. Do me a favor, post your comments, and tell me your favorite lawyer TV shows so we can talk about them too. That's it.